Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first of four in a series of presentations on navigating in the wild using your smartphone. My name is Rick Almendinger, and you may be wondering why you should listen to me. Well, I'm a geologist with 50 years of field experience in the western United States and in the Andes of South America. In addition, I'm also the author of field collection apps and several hiking apps for the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So, in other words, I know what I'm talking about, both when it comes to backcountry navigation and when it comes to how smartphones actually work. My intention in this series of presentations is to give you an understanding of how to use your smartphone safely with any hiking app. Although I will use the screenshots from my own White Mountain Hiker apps, the icons of which you can see at the bottom of the screen, those apps are free and not supported by any advertisements. So I'm not trying to get you to buy anything, either explicitly or implicitly. So let's get started. In 2022, Appalachia, the Journal of the Appalachian Mountain Club, published an article entitled "Do Cell Phones Belong in the White Mountains?" or in the mountains in general. And that's a legitimate question to ask, especially if we replace cell with smart. Do smartphones belong in the White Mountains? But before we can answer it, there are several different uses of smartphones that we have to consider. For example, they're commonly used for social media. Now, I'm not a big social media fan, and I have no interest in telling people how many miles I've hiked or how many thousand feet of vertical I've covered on any particular outing. But even social media does have a role, especially in crowdsourcing information about current trail conditions and so on. So it's not entirely useless. Second is for communications, music players, cameras, etc. Now, for many people, their smartphone is their only camera, and there are thousands of photographs taken with smartphones, or probably millions of photographs. With respect to communications and music players and so on, the main advice I can give is that if you choose to have a cell phone conversation or use a music player in the wild, use headphones. It's the height of rudeness to subject other people to your phone conversations or your choice of music. Third, smartphones can be the sources of information with some spectacular apps for flora and fauna identification, such as Merlin for birds, or Seek or iNaturalist for plants and so on, for geology, etc. So they're very useful in that sense. Fourth, they are undoubtedly extremely useful and essential in modern search and rescue operations in the mountains. And search and rescue people will testify over and over again about how important smartphones are in that role. Finally, you can use smartphones for navigations, and that's the subject of this series of presentations. So continuing on with Do Smartphones Belong in the Mountains? Many longtime experts recommend paper maps and analog compasses over smartphone apps, and they are or can be rather dismissive of smartphone hiking apps. There are some who even eschew technology and say that it doesn't belong in the wilderness at all, even though their maps and their hiking gear are created with very 21st century tech. But this is basically a losing battle for younger generations who's attached to their phone. And even older generations might learn a thing or two by using their phone and referring to their phone while in the wilderness. And if you're going to navigate by phone, then you need to know how to do it safely. Again, that's the purpose of these series of presentations. So to skip right to the end, in case you don't want to listen to any more of the presentation, here are the take-home points for all four series of presentations I'm doing. First, you need to download maps for offline use ahead of time. The wilderness generally has lousy cell service, if it has any cell service at all. Second, you need to carry a charged auxiliary battery and cable with you. This is required if you're going to depend on the device for your safety. Third, an accurate GPS position depends on your device having a full sky view. If you don't have a full sky view, your position can be off by hundreds of feet. Fourth, because redundancy in critical systems is an important part of any safety precaution, you really ought to always carry a paper map and analog compass with you as a backup, even if you're primarily navigating by your phone. Some additional points: planning a route involves both distance and the time it will take, and knowing how to assess difficulty and danger from topography and slope angle. We'll cover all these points in the talk. And then just a public service announcement. Many commercial apps share, that is, they sell your anonymized location data to location brokers. You may be perfectly fine with that, or that may be a concern to you. But here are the big 4 points that I want you to remember, if nothing else. So, starting at the beginning, if you're going to take your device into the wilderness, you need a rugged case and an auxiliary battery. This is my phone and its ruggedized case, and the 1500 milliampere hour battery that I take along with it. As you can see, it's a little thicker, but actually a little bit smaller than the phone itself. And importantly, don't forget the charging cable and make sure the battery is charged, because if you forget the charging cable, this battery just becomes dead weight and has no use to you at all. Okay, navigating roadmap. Navigation in the wild involves 4 basic aspects. First is knowing where you are, that is your location, and the direction you're facing. Second is the spatial context of your location from a topographic map of your surroundings. Third is knowing where you want to go and the path that you want to take, that is, the trails or routes. And fourth is assessing the difficulty of your route and the time it will take to get there. We're going to start with number 1 in this first presentation, knowing where you are and the direction you are facing. For millennia, people have located themselves using a method known as triangulation. Let's say our hiker is here and the hiker can see 3 different peaks, and they also can see those 3 peaks on their map. They simply take a compass bearing on each of the 3 peaks, and voila. Now, ideally, these 3 yellow rays or bearings should intersect in a single point, but they never do because we can't measure bearings perfectly. And so the triangle that they form is formally known as the triangle of error, and this equates to the uncertainty in your position. GPS essentially works exactly the same way, but in 3D, and thus it's known as tri or usually multilateration because there are more than 3 GPS satellites involved. But let's say you're hiking along the base of a cliff here. You can see that your GPS device can see this GPS satellite in the upper left, but it cannot see this GPS satellite in the upper right. And so your position's uncertainty is increased. In other words, GPS accuracy depends on a full sky view. Your location will be less accurate in valley bottoms, next to steep slopes, under a heavy tree canopy, inside a shelter, etc. And if you want to be aware of this, you should pick a hiking app that displays your location uncertainty. Now, elevation is part of your overall location information. And the time-honored way of getting your elevation is to read the contour lines on a contour map once you know where you are. And that still works splendidly well. You should know that GPS elevations are very inaccurate. And most apps can get an elevation from an internet elevation service, but this requires a cellular data connection. It's usually a premium feature. And because you're now selling your location data not only with the mapping company, but with the elevation service provider, there are perhaps increased privacy concerns. For what it's worth, my apps involve or include the full digital elevation model in the app itself, so it's completely offline. Now, we get our facing, the direction that we're looking from compasses. And here is the digital compass app from an iPhone compass. And this, frankly, leaves something to be desired. There's no indication in this screen whether it's reading magnetic north or true north. It does not show bearing or position uncertainty at all. And thirdly, it gives you an elevation from GPS without any uncertainty at all, even though I've just told you that GPS elevations are very inaccurate. The app that I use on my iOS devices is called Pro Compass, and it has several advantages over the built-in free app, and that is it displays the uncertainties prominently, and it differentiates clearly between magnetic north and true north. It's still giving me the GPS altitude rather than the local altitude, and unfortunately, although it says plus or minus 12 feet here, I know that it was actually 20 feet higher than the actual elevation when I was taking this screenshot. So one thing to be aware of is that digital compasses are extremely susceptible to local magnetic and electronic interference, and they can easily give you bearings which are off by 30 degrees or more. Secondly, is that your bearing when you're moving is quite a bit more accurate than when standing still. And that's because the device does not use its magnetometer at all when you're moving. What it does is it uses the difference between your current GPS position and your previous GPS position to calculate the bearing or the direction that you're moving in. Okay, so we've got our location and our compass. And our facing. We put it into our app, or our app collects it for us, and we get this. Great. We have a location. We have the direction we're facing, and this does us virtually no good at all because knowing your coordinates is not very useful without the spatial context provided by a map. And that, the spatial context provided by the map, is what we'll look at in part 2 of this series.